Authentication with Copilot can be super tricky and is super important. And so that's what I want to talk about in today's video, and really just introducing what are the out-of-the-box capabilities for how you can ensure the right people are talking to your Copilot. So I just want to take some time and talk through the different options that are currently available for authentication settings within Microsoft Copilot Studio for your Copilot. And I am sure that you are here because you recognize that validating who is talking to your Copilot and potentially having access to sensitive information is really important. And I totally understand that. Here I am within Microsoft Copilot Studio, and I have a completely new, fresh bot, our weather bot here. And what you're going to want to do is over here in the top right-hand corner, there's going to be settings. And underneath settings, you're going to find security. And underneath security, you're going to find authentication. And there are kind of three main options that are available. There are no authentication, which means that anybody who has access or a link to this Copilot can interact with it. There is authenticate with Microsoft, which uses Entra ID, as it says here, and doesn't actually even require a sign-in. It automatically understands who the user is. And then there's authenticate manually, which you can set up here. And I want to kind of add some further explanation here and even go through some of the Microsoft documentation on these different options. The first thing I want to say is if you have no authentication, all that means is that in order to start talking to your Copilot, somebody's going to be able to start interacting with it. That does not necessarily mean if your Copilot has some, limiting or sensitive features, you can still have some security lockdown things around that. But nonetheless, this is to start talking to your Copilot. I also want to say that the authentication settings pretty directly impact the channels that your Copilot can be deployed to. And so if you're unfamiliar with what channels are how you're able to share your Copilot with the world, right? It's how people can interact with it. And there are a lot of cool out-of-the-box channels that you can set up. And so, for example, if you configure your Copilot to use M365, then your only authenticate option is the Microsoft Entra ID. And so just understand if you are limited based off of the authentication settings that you would like to select, it's absolutely because of your channels and that they do have a pretty direct impact there. Now, I want to go through some of this Microsoft documentation and just walk through and explain it in case this is confusing to you. There will be a link to this down in the description down below. And so the first one here, this no authentication, this means that your agent doesn't require users to sign in when interacting with an agent. An unauthenticated configuration means your agent can access public information and resources. Classic chatbots are configured to default to not require authentication. And here's just this big caution red X saying, hey, just so you know, if you select no authentication, you might be putting your organization at risk, and you can't necessarily control who can initially talk to the bot. Then you have authenticate with Microsoft, and this means all channels except the Teams and Microsoft channel are disabled. So understand, here's kind of that first instance of where the channel and authentication settings directly impact each other. This configuration automatically sets up Microsoft Entra ID authentication for Teams without the need for any manual configuration. One thing I wanted to note is that if you need to publish your agent to other channels but still want authentication for your Copilot, you then need to go to option number 3, the authenticate manually. I'm hoping that is making sense. If I'm not answering your specific question that you have, I want you to follow the first link down in the description down below. That's going to be how you can get into direct contact via email with me. I would love to set up a one-on-one session so that I can learn and potentially help you learn a little bit more about Microsoft Copilot Studio, because we're just all trying to learn something together, right? So let's go ahead and crush out this last final, authenticate manually privilege. It's something that I thought was interesting that I wanted to note here is authentication changes only take effect after the agent is published, and this setting can be controlled by the corresponding admin control in the Power Platform. When the control is enabled, it prevents the authenticate manually option from being enabled or disabled within Copilot Studio. Another thing I wanted to talk about, yes, it's this next passage here, requiring users to sign in and agent sharing. So underneath authenticate manually, you'll see that there's this require users to sign in, and you might think, why would I ever not check that? Like I'm authenticating manually. And that was confusing to me as well until I read this. This determines whether a user needs to sign in before talking with the agent. We highly recommend that you turn this on, but you are able to turn it off, and this option isn't available for no authentication and authenticate with Microsoft options. If you turn off this option, your agent doesn't ask users to sign in until it encounters a topic that requires them to. So say you have some sort of custom connection or a Power Automate flow that requires, authentication, then at that point it will ask them to sign in. As well, what this does is this actually sets up a require users to sign in topic. And if you are unfamiliar with topics are just how you can break out your Copilot into its different purposes and the things that it does. There's going to be plenty that are out of the box created for you, like a conversation start, like an end conversation, like a goodbye and a greeting. Several. It is going to automatically create a require users to sign in topic, and you can change this and modify it and modify the text just like any other topic. I think that's super interesting. I think authentication is something that is super important to make sure you nail down correctly to keep your stuff secure. If you have any further things that I did not answer or need some additional tutorials, check out this playlist of all of the Copilot Studio tutorials I have on this channel. Thank you for being here. My name is Griffin. If you want to come hang out, come check us out on the Power Talks podcast directly on this channel, where we talk to all sorts of experts and Microsoft MVPs on a weekly basis. Thanks for being here. I'm excited to connect with you in the next one.